Preston Dennett has been a UFO and paranormal researcher for over 35 years. He's written dozens of books and hundreds of articles about UFOs and other mysterious phenomena. His books include Schoolyard UFO Encounters, Undersea UFO Base, Not From Here, and Mysteries, Legends, and Unexplained Phenomena, UFOs and Aliens. Please see the description for relevant links, recommended books, and timestamps. So Preston, to start us off, can you please tell me how you first became interested in the UFO phenomenon and in the paranormal?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, because I did not believe in UFOs or anything paranormal growing up, even though I did have a few strange things happen. I mean, when I was about 9 years old, I had a really weird psychic event where I kind of knew all the answers to a game show. And I just kind of thought it was funny and didn't really think much about it. Yeah, my sister was with me. She verifies it for me. I ask her every couple of years, "You remember that?" She's like, yeah, I remember. Yeah, it was weird, but I didn't know what psychic ability was back then.
And you were 9?
I was 9 years old. Yep.
And so these obscure answers. I'm guessing it wasn't like questions that a 9-year-old would normally know the answer to. So these obscure questions.
It was like I just knew who was going to be in the audience, who would get picked to be on the show, which canister had the flowers in it.
Oh, right.
On the stage, there was like 80 boxes of all various sizes, and one of them held a check. And I'm like, I know which one it is. I forget the number. It was like 73. I'm like, it's in number 73. Wow. And of course it was.
Yeah.
We just thought that was the funniest thing. Yeah. We're just rolling on the floor laughing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, looking back in hindsight, I can see that was psychic, because there's just no way I could have known this.
That's pretty wild. Yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of my first, I guess, introduction or inkling of something strange going on.
Yeah. But at that point, you didn't you didn't think, oh, this is something else. So where did you go from there? You had more experiences before kind of igniting your interest in these things, or?
Yeah. I pretty much grew up to an adult, and my mom passed away tragically when I was 19 years old. And we were at her service. My dad drove up in the car, and I saw my mom in the front seat.
Oh, wow.
Her spirit. And again, I didn't think, oh, this is, my mother's spirit. I'm thinking, well, I am obviously losing my mind with grief. And I'm looking around, because there was people on both sides of me.
Yeah.
And he drove right up next to me, and I could see her clear as day. Yeah. I mean, in color. And I'm looking at her going, what the heck is going on? When she just kind of faded away.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, yeah, I'm really sad. I mean, I must be just hallucinating. I don't know. I did not know how to explain it. Yeah. I did not think spirit or ghost until years later when I started reading about these sort of things.
Wow. Did she say anything to you, in that moment? Or was it was just, and she just appeared to you and kind of, I guess you had comfort, you felt comforted in some way, I suppose, or I'm totally speculating.
In a manner of speaking, yeah, I suppose. I mean, she didn't turn and look at me, but I could definitely tell it was her, because she has, and she sits up very straight. She's always chiding people on their posture, sit up straight, and there she was with her hands folded neatly on her lap. This was a little bit of a rocky road. And so you could see her kind of wavering back and forth, balancing on the bumps and curves in the road, which brought a sense of realism to it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like she was just kind of floating or anything. She was there.
Yeah.
That was just, I'm like, wow. And again, I didn't think this was paranormal at all. I just kind of rolled with it and thought, well, I don't know. And it became sort of my deep, dark secret. That was one thing I thought, I'm not telling anyone this. They're going to think I've lost my mind.
Yeah.
And it wasn't terribly long after that when everything did really change for me. It was about 2 years later, 1986, November 17, actually. I remember the exact date. And I was watching the news with several other family members in the evening when a little segment came on describing a UFO sighting over Alaska. It involved a commercial Japanese jet airliner.
Yeah.
I'd seen a UFO while flying over Alaska. And it's now a very famous sighting in the field. Captain Kenju Torochi and his crew were basically followed by this very large UFO, bigger than their jet. It's a great case. I mean, it appeared on radar, on their plane's radar, on the FAA's radar. None of this was in the news report. They just kind of laughed about this pilot. But I remember thinking, wow, this poor man, this pilot must be misperceiving. Because there's no such thing as UFOs. It's definitely not an alien spacecraft. He must be seeing a reflection off the ice cap. This is what I'm thinking, which really makes no sense at all. But I remembered, well, gosh, my brother Mark, my older brother, I had 3 older brothers, and a sister above me and a sister below me. So we're
cool.
Quite a few of us, 6 kids. Yeah. And no one had ever really talked about UFOs, except my brother some 4 or 5 years earlier. Maybe even, 7, I think it was late 1970s, actually. He came in. Well, I was 14 years old. So now I'm 19. So it would be 5 years.
Yeah.
No, wait, let's see. I was 21. Sorry. So yeah, it was 1986. I'm 21 years old. And I was about 14 when my brother came running into the house saying he'd seen a UFO. Yeah. We were eating dinner and I just kind of rolled my eyes. All I really remember him saying was, it was about at the top of the telephone poles and it was close. I'm like, yeah, right, Mark, shut up, go away. UFOs aren't real. I don't believe you for a second. And I wouldn't even listen to him. I just didn't want to hear it. I did not believe in it.
Wow.
But after hearing this report in the news, I am like, okay, Mark, did you hear about this pilot? He's like, no. I'm like, yeah, this pilot, he's ridiculous. He thinks he saw a UFO. You think you saw one too, right? He's like, I did see one. I'm like, really? He's like, I did. I'm like, okay, tell me. And he described, I mean, it knocked me over when I actually started listening. He described this amazing sighting where he was driving down Reseda Boulevard. This is in Southern California. It's a busy street at night. And he saw this saucer-shaped object about 50 or 100 feet away from him, very low level, like he said, just above the telephone poles.
Yeah.
And it was a silverish, kind of gray silver metallic object. It had colored lights around the perimeter, a dome on top, no portholes or anything, and was totally silent and was just sitting there. So he and his 2 friends, Phil and Greg, he had 2 friends with him, took their Volkswagen bus and drove towards it and got up to it practically when it took off down the street. So they followed it and it would wait for them until they got real close and then it would dart ahead again. So they basically chased it down Reseda Boulevard for 15 minutes, passing other cars who were like pointing at it with their heads out the window. Look. So this was a really impressive sighting. Clearly not, a helicopter or anything like this, but I could not wrap my head around what he was saying. Just looking at him like, Mark, I don't know, I don't even know how to take this. And he's like, well, if you don't believe me, ask my friends. You know them. His friends, Phil and Greg, which I did because they'd been over the house several times. We all had our friends. And I called them up. He gave me their numbers and I called them up and they were so excited. They're like, oh yeah, both of them gave this essentially the same description with tiny little variants.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, they saw something. I know they're not lying. I doubt they're misperceiving. It's clearly not a hallucination. Because those are my kind of go-tos. I'm like, this is what people are seeing. It's a hoax, it's a hallucination, it's a misperception. And it wasn't any of those. So that really kind of got me puzzled. And I started asking all my other siblings, and none of them had seen anything. 2 of my brothers, they're like, shut up, UFOs aren't real. I'm like, well, I think you're right, but I'm not so sure because, Mark thinks he saw one. I asked my sisters, and they're like, oh, I think they're real. They both just felt it was real.
Yeah.
My sister Victoria, I'm like, why do you think it's real? She says, don't you remember the encyclopedias we had as kids? They mentioned UFOs. I'm like, no, I don't remember that. So I started asking other people, and it turned out that my brother's girlfriend, Mark's girlfriend, had encounters with little blue beings as a kid.
Wow. Interesting.
And I wasn't quite ready to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really wasn't. So I kind of just filed it in the back of my mind and asked my other brother's girlfriend. And she's like, oh, yeah, I saw a UFO, me and my two friends. And she described these lights darting around over Van Nuys Air Force Reserve Base, not too far away from where we lived. And I'm just kind of looking at her. I'm like, I don't know. And she said, well, if you don't believe me, ask Adlai. He was there. I'm like, oh, Adlai, her friend. So I did. And he's like, oh, yeah. And gave the same description, again, with tiny little differences. She did not, my sister-in-law did not remember the subject moving away, but he did. So that was kind of the only difference. So I'm like, maybe there is something to it. I started asking our friends. We had a family friend named Sylvia Walters, who, we all adored, of course. And she was a flight instructor, a pilot. So I thought, here's someone who might have some insight.
Yeah.
I asked her, I'm like, Sylvia, what do you think about UFOs? She's like, I saw one. I'm like, oh gosh, really? She's like, yeah, I was in my house. This is in Topanga Canyon, where we lived, again, in Southern California. This is right outside of LA. And she says, I was in my house with my friend. And that raised my eyebrows again, because I thought, gosh, people who see UFOs, I thought they were all alone. I thought they were by themselves. I thought they were uneducated. I thought they were out in the country somewhere.
Drunk.
Yeah, I had all these misconceptions, which were just being knocked down right and left. She says, I heard this strange buzzing noise. We both did. And it was odd, because it wasn't a helicopter, but it was fairly loud. And they went running outside, and right over their house is this huge, white, glowing, egg-shaped object, just moving lazily in kind of up and down pattern, kind of like rocking on the waves. I would later learn that's a very important detail, because UFOs have this way of kind of just fluttering the sky. And she says it just kind of moved lazily over the house very slowly. And they could hear it going, making this really loud transformer type noise. I'm like, oh gosh, this is really beginning to hurt me. I don't like this, because this was upsetting me. This was not taught in schools. This was not being presented on TV in any serious manner at all. And at the time, I was working at a business office, doing data entry mostly, but moving up into bookkeeping. And I brought it up stupidly. I almost, at the time, I regretted it, honestly, because I just wasn't ready to hear what my coworkers had to say.
Yeah.
The lady I worked next to, who I adored, she won't let me use her name. I'll call her Diane. I'm like, Diane, what do you think about UFOs? And she laughed. She says, oh, well, they're real. I can tell you that. I'm like, why would you say that? She says, well, me and my whole family were up in the mountains in San Bernardino at church camp, and this object showed up, and everyone there saw it, her whole family and other people around her. She said it was like a star-like object, but much bigger, and would dart around and stop. I'm like, you saw a helicopter, Diane? She's like, no, I didn't. This thing went from horizon to horizon in about 3 seconds, less. And then would stop and turn at right angles. It's like, we watched it for an hour, Preston. It was not a helicopter. It was perfectly silent. I'm like, are you serious? She's like, listen, you know my daughter, Karen. You can talk to her. She's coming to pick me up. And of course I did. And Karen said, well, I saw grays. I'm like, what? At that point, I had picked up a book or two about grays, Missing Times by Bud Hopkins.
Yeah. And
she described having these guys, the little gray guys, big eyes, huge head, bald, gray skin.
Basically like on the front of Communion, Whitley Strieber's Communion.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she says they came, surrounded her bed, and said, you have to come with us. She's like, no, I'm not going with you. Found herself on board a craft, presumably. It was a little round room, and being physically examined. I mean, it's quite a long story. I ended up interviewing her later. But, before that even happened, I'm talking with Diane, the mother, and in walks Dorothy. Dorothy was another coworker, Dorothy
Right.
Hudson. And I love Dorothy. She's really funny. She's very outgoing, super smart, and just a riot. I mean, she's a hilarious person because she's unfiltered, she
Yeah.
will lay it out. And she's like, "Oh, UFOs. One followed me home from the library when I was a kid." I'm like, "Dorothy, shut up." She's like, "No, no, no." And I'm like, "Well, tell me what happened." And she said that she was at the Pio Pico Library in Koreatown. This is
Hmm.
downtown LA. I mean, it's very urbanized, houses everywhere. And she says I know exactly what time it was because we had come out of the library 5 minutes before it closed. So we could sneak a cigarette before her mom came to pick them up. They were like 14 years old, right?
Yeah.
And so they're sitting on the porch steps of the Pio Pico Library in Koreatown at 9 p.m., well, 5 minutes to 9, smoking cigarettes when they see this star-like object drop from the sky in a split second, and it's a saucer, and it's hovering right across the street, right over the telephone wires. I'm like, "Dorothy, are you kidding me?" She says, "Preston, this thing was perfectly round. It had tiny little twinkling lights. It was beautiful. Different colors, yellow, green, blue, red, and no portholes or anything, but completely silent and right above the telephone wires." And at that point, they put out the cigarettes because her mom pulls up. It's 9 o'clock now, right?
Mum's gonna smell it, but yeah, carry
Right.
on.
And so they jump up and run to the car. They're like, "Mom, look." And I ended up interviewing Carol, her friend, and her mom, all three of them. And her mom visibly shakes, goes, "Oh my God," and looks at it and says, "Get in the car now."
Wow.
And they pile into the back seat and she takes off. They live precisely 5 minutes from the library. It's very close. And they're like, "Mom, it's following us."
Mm.
And it was. All three witnesses said it followed them right above the car, maybe 50, 100 feet up. It's hard to tell the exact distance, but this was a large object, as big as a
Mm.
small house. And it followed them all the way home, which is
Wow.
just a mile or two. And so they pull into the driveway and she's like, "Get in the house now." Because it's right above their street, right next to their house. And they run to the house, they run upstairs so they can look out the picture window to look at this thing. And it's still there, and it moves back and forth, back one more time, and goes up at a 45-degree angle. And they watch it disappear into a tiny little star-like object and off into the distance, and it's gone. So this is what Dorothy's telling me. I'm like, wow. She says, "Wait." At this point, Carol, her friend, looks at the clock and says, "Dorothy, look at the clock. It's
Mm.
10:15." And all three of them were like, "How could that happen? It was
Yeah.
9 when we left. It's now 10:15." She's like, "Preston, I don't even know how to explain this, but the time slipped away from us, but it's impossible. She's struggling to explain it." I'm like, "Dorothy, you were abducted. You had missing time." I'm jumping up and down. She's like, "What are you talking about?" Because she had no idea what missing time was, and I did at that point. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Dorothy, probably something happened you don't probably remember. You should go under hypnosis." She's like, "I'm not doing that." Oh. And I really freaked her out, and she's freaking me out. So yeah, that was kind of my introduction. That's what got me to buy
Yeah.
every darn UFO book I could find, and I did.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
joined. I joined MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. Let's face it, I joined QFOs. I joined all Citizens Against UFOs. I joined every UFO group. And when I joined MUFON, they have a little monthly journal. I wrote to them. I said, "Here's a check, for $100. I want every journal all the way back to 1962 or whatever it was when you started."
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I was going to find out what this was.
Wow.
I started attending every convention, and I lost my mind because I could not believe that this was going on and no one was talking about it.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
I mean, it literally hit home for me, and I was upset. This should have been taught in schools. I
Yeah.
was mad too because there was a government cover up. I'm like, what the heck? This was easily provable even back then that there was a government cover up and still
Yeah.
is. So yeah,
Yeah.
not good news. It took me a couple of years to really say, okay, this is for sure real. But
Yeah.
even now, I'm still kind of like, wow, I cannot believe this is going on.
It's still pretty like unbelievable, isn't it? Really, when you think about it, yeah. When you stop and actually think and really process it. But yeah, that's crazy how you kind of got into it. So basically, you were a hardcore skeptic. I mean, I like to think that we're still skeptics. It's just about asking questions. But you were a hardcore skeptic. You were just even a scoffer. You were just saying, no, come on, no way, no way, nonsense, rubbish. But then you kept kind of turning over stones and kept finding UFOs. You basically everybody that you're nudging on the shoulder, like ever heard of UFOs? Everybody's seen one. Everybody has a story to tell you.
Yeah,
and
it was
wow.
upsetting.
Yeah.
Ironically, it actually made me more skeptical in a weird way because I had to reevaluate everything. So when someone starts telling me, "Oh, I saw a UFO," I'm like, "Okay," and I dig in. I'd be like, "Tell me everything," because I just couldn't believe it. And I did have a fairly solid scientific background. I was in college when all this was going down, and I was taking astronomy. I was really deep into the higher levels of it, not just astronomy 101. I really enjoyed astronomy and biology and psychology, and all of the sciences were kind of where I was at, because I thought, here's true knowledge. And I was always kind of a seeker anyway. So that really helped me to sort of just stand back, be objective, and look at what people are actually saying.
Yeah, exactly. We have to look at what they're saying. Yeah, whether we know if people are telling the truth or not, we have to listen and we can then assess. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate that you've been doing that for 35 years now. Is it 35, nearly 40 years? So what year was it? What year was it when you first started? Just to save me doing the immediate mental arithmetic, what year was it that you started looking into it? So it's 88, is it something like that?
Yeah, exactly. 86 was when it kind of hit me, but that was late in the year. 1987, I was just out of my mind trying to wrap my head around it. And 88 is when I did become a field investigator for MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. I have to tell you,
go on, sorry, you have to tell me.
Yeah, they make you take a test, which is actually encouraging, because you can't just sign up for an investigator and do it. But it was a take-home test. When I found that out, I'm like, well, this is gonna be easy. And because it's a take-home test, how hard can it be?
Yeah, it has to be easy to encourage you to actually do it yourself,
Yeah. Well, it wasn't easy, actually. It turned out to be really hard.
Okay.
It was 200 questions. I thought it was going to be, if it's a take-home test. I always loved tests in school anyway, so I'm like, but this was harder than I thought. There was no internet, of course, back then, so you can't just, look up the answer. Thankfully, there were libraries, and I had to use them because there were all kinds of questions on meteorology, which I was taking a class at the time in meteorology, which is surprisingly scientific. I mean, who knew there were 30 different types of clouds? I mean, there are, so there was a lot of questions on that, especially astronomy, photography, all kinds of scientific questions, and of course, all about the history of UFOs. But I did well. I missed 2 answers. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. I was so upset. So I missed 2 answers, but hey.
So you had 198 out of 200.
Yeah.
99%.
One was a stupid, I just marked the wrong thing. I knew the answer, I just did it wrong. But one I genuinely did not know. So
yeah. Do you remember what the question was that you didn't know? The one out of the 200. Does it still haunt you?
I don't. I think it must have been one of the...
You've gotten over it then.
I wish I had saved the test. That was so many years ago, and I've moved so many times.
Yeah.
Now they actually make you take classes, and it's a bit more difficult. But back then it was a little more lax, and I had to kind of learn, how to do interviewing by myself. There were no classes on how to interview people. So I went through that the hard way.
I guess it's a harder job today in a lot of ways with, like the technology we have of like videos and, like you got to be able to distinguish what's real, what's fake and all of that. And there's obviously a lot more in the sky, or not a lot more in the sky, but there's more drones and things like that. And there are more hands. And anyway, so yeah, since 88 or around then, 35 years ago, I'm just getting what I want to get at here is, say, I guess since 1990. So since you were first kind of just getting into this phenomenon, you were just kind of starting to maybe draw your own, not definitive, but kind of loose conclusions, like what you think might be going on and all that kind of stuff. How has that changed now? What are your kind of, how much has this phenomenon, not the phenomenon changed, but the kind of, the conversation around it? How much have your opinions changed? How has that developed and all that kind of thing? For example, like maybe initially you were like, oh, it must be, in the words of Neil deGrasse Tyson, space aliens, and now you're like, oh, maybe it's like something different. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my opinions and my assessment, I guess, did evolve, certainly, because when I got involved in this field, I was horrified. I thought this was a negative thing, because there was a lot of fear-based thinking surrounding this, a lot of confusion. The media loves a lurid, scary story. And so it was around the same time that I got involved in this field when Communion came out, or the book, and Light Years by Gary Kinder, and Bud Hopkins' second book, Intruders, came out, and Missing Time became a bestseller because it was initially published by a tiny little publisher and wasn't well known at all. I found it as a hardback by Richard Merrick Publishers. Of course, Ballantine, I think, picked it up and it became a huge bestseller. And so it was just flooding the media as I entered this field. And the way it was being presented was not nice. Yeah. And I kind of bought into that. I'm like, well, I think people are being kidnapped against their will. They're being experimented on by bug-like aliens who have no emotions and are uncaring.
Bud Hopkins thought it was pretty dark, didn't he, as well? So, yeah, in his book, I guess.
I would say he's a little bit more objective than, say, David Jacobs, who does take a very dim view, whereas John Mack's like, no, I think this is not so bad, really. Yeah. So it was a little confusing. And I'm trying to wrap my head around it. I'm like, you know what? I am not sure who's telling the truth or not. I need to find out for myself. I'm going to just dive into the people who are having direct contact. So I would interview anyone who had any kind of sighting. But when I found someone who says, I saw ETs face to face, I'd be like, oh gosh, please, can I interview you? And I was taken on board. I'm like, please, can I talk to you? Yeah. And I would always record the interviews. I did a whole vetting process from the beginning because I learned. And my viewpoints began to change pretty quickly because I realized, well, you know what? This is not a negative experience for most people, not the people I'm talking to. Yes, it's very scary initially when someone has a gray come to their bedroom and pulls them on board a craft. And I've talked to people who, had a real hard time with it. Yeah. But I noticed some interesting patterns right off the bat. Was that the group, all the types of ETs, because there were many different types, but they would say something along the lines of, don't be afraid. It's okay. Calm down. No harm will come to you. Do not be afraid. Have no fear. We are not here to hurt you. They would say that in every single case, almost without exception. I thought, wow, that is certainly interesting. Yeah. And they would be pulled on board. And I started to hear about people being healed. I'm like, well, this is interesting. Why isn't anyone talking about this? It's like one of the first people I interviewed described the healing. She had, had encounters with grays, had a cyst in her fallopian tube, and the day before surgery, literally the night before surgery, she had a visitation. She's like, well, this is strange. I wonder if this is going to have any effect on, me going to surgery the next day, because she thought that was odd that they would come that night. And of course it was odd, and it did have an effect because she went to have surgery and did the imaging, the MRIs and so forth. They couldn't find the cyst. And they accused her of having had surgery at another hospital. They said, your cyst is gone. Where did you go? And she says, I didn't go anywhere. I didn't have surgery. And I said, well, you're lying. We know you've had surgery because there's fluid here in your fallopian tube. This could only be present if your cyst was surgically removed in some way. And they pointed to an actual, what looked like a laser scar on her stomach. It was already healed. So she just kind of played dumb because she knew. And that's when I'm like, gosh, here we go again. I'm going to write an article about this. And this is when my thinking really started to change.
Or a couple of books eventually.
Yeah, because I had written a bunch of articles at this point. And thought, I'm going to write an article about people who've been healed, because I knew of several cases in the literature. Jacques Vallée had a case of a doctor in France who was healed of an axe wound on his foot, partial paralysis. Ralph and Judy Bloom had presented a case in their book, Beyond UFOs, where a Peruvian's customs official was hit by a beam of light, and it healed him of rheumatism and nearsightedness. I knew of another case in Damon, Texas, involving 2 police officers who were struck again by a beam of light, and one was healed of a wound on his finger, where he had been bit by a baby pet alligator and had a wound, and it was healed. So I'm like, this would be a good article. So I started, I interviewed Wendy, I call her, about her case, and started collecting others. I found like 30 cases in just a couple of days. And I told my sister-in-law, my Christy is her name. I'd been working with her. She's an artist, and she would kind of draw people's UFOs of the people I was interviewing, or the ETs. She's like, you should write a book. I'm like, a book? You're kidding. And she's like, no, you should, because this whole phenomenon is being badly portrayed. It's not a nefarious phenomena. People are not being taken against their will. Although they may perceive it that way initially, most of the people I interviewed kind of came around and realized they're not trying to hurt me. This was something I agreed to. So my thinking kind of took a 180-degree turn. And I realized, okay, let's step back and take a second look at all of this. Is this negative? No, because people are being taken on board and healed. They're being shown the engine room, told how the craft works. They're being taken up to the observation deck, I'll call it. They'll turn the walls transparent and show you the Earth far below, or more often a star field, or other planets even. It's amazing. They'll take you up to the control room and show you, here's how we fly the craft. I had a few cases later on where people were sat down in the pilot seat, told how to fly the craft. So this is when my thinking changed. I'm like, you know what? This is not how it's being portrayed in a lot of these books. I reread Bud Hopkins' book, Missing Time, to see if, and it was actually quite objective. So I have to give him kudos.
Yeah.
Though I later did talk to one of his witnesses who was in one of his books. And she says, he told the truth, but he's left out all the good parts. I'm like, what do you mean? She said, well, I had all these spiritual experiences, all these, psychic stuff. And that was not in the book. He left it out. And that really rang a bell with me, because people were describing how they were spiritually transformed, psychically awakened by their encounters. And we're having all kinds of psychic events. I started having to research ghosts and out-of-body experiences and precognition, and the whole thing, life after death. So my thinking definitely changed over the years. I do think, from the beginning, I thought this was extraterrestrials, and I still think it is. I think there is a lot of stuff getting put under the UFO umbrella that doesn't belong there. There are interdimensional beings. Certainly there are ghosts and Bigfoot and all kinds of stuff that people are trying to put all into one box. We love labels, we love trying to just put everything in a neat little package and wrap it up with a bow. And it's just, I think that can be a mistake, because we still don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
But if you look at the totality of the evidence, I think it speaks very loudly that this is extraterrestrials. I just cannot get away from that as the explanation for all this, because it's
just to clarify, when you say extraterrestrials, you're referring to like interplanetary physical beings that have come here in some kind of craft via some form of propulsion.
Yeah.
We don't need to decide how they came here exactly right now, but that's what you're saying basically. Yeah, it's an interplanetary idea.
Yeah, because people were raising different explanations, like maybe they're time travelers, they're us from the future.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me look at every darn case I can find and everyone I've interviewed. I don't have any good reason to believe that that would be true. Other people say, well, they're interdimensional. And at that point, I was having out-of-body experiences. I had researched people who've had near-death experiences, and we ourselves are interdimensional. Everything is interdimensional. So that, I mean, I didn't see that as a very useful explanation.
I struggle to kind of get my head around it sometimes, you know, the whole idea of like interdimensional beings that are like UFOs are that, and it's kind of, it
didn't make sense.
What does it mean really, you know, because could they be from another planet, but the means of transport kind of means they are interdimensional. Is that possible? It could be kind of both in a way.
Exactly.
You know, it's kind of, it gets a bit confusing.
One doesn't preclude the other.
Yeah.
I absolutely think they can travel interdimensionally. Because that's certainly what we see in terms of the reports from the contactees. I learned to leave my own beliefs behind. And I started to notice a lot of researchers had not done that. They were doing what I would call shoe fitting or cherry picking. Because you can, if you, with 100,000 cases out there documented, you can pull which ones you want to sort of confirm your theory. But that's not true science. You have to take all the evidence. And having realized that a lot of these reports were not complete or even accurate, I relied mostly on my own research, because at that I knew that I personally had vetted it. So that's what I kind of really focused on. And I started to look at other researchers who I thought were legit and were actually doing the whole research in an objective way. I like John Mack because he absolutely just stepped back and didn't try to exert his own beliefs over another person's experience. And definitely I think they are extraterrestrials, because if you look at the evidence, these things are appearing on radar. These are metallic craft, because people do have metallic samples at various landing trace sites like Socorro. A lot of people don't know that, but metal samples were taken. And where these craft land, the soil has been tested to see radiation readings. How does that happen? You can see that the soil has been glassified if it's sand, which means that it was heated to at least 2,000 or 3,000 degrees. Some of these objects will depress hard soil, so they know how heavy it is. And it's a couple of tons in some of these cases. And these objects have portholes, and they're landing, and little beings are coming out. And people who are being taken on board are not in their rooms. Their whole family is searching for them. They're not home. Where are they? And let's face it, if the reports of crash retrievals are true, and I think they are, because it's not just the famous Roswell crash in 1947 in New Mexico. There's a lot of them. And if those are true, well, all bets are off. There's the craft. What, you're going to tell me that that's not real, that it's not sitting right there in front of you, and that is not an alien body? I mean, it's the explanation which is so logical.
I mean, to be fair, that's kind of where I was. I mean, now I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit more like, I don't really know, and I kind of don't want to put a label on it, as you were just saying a minute ago. I'm kind of like, okay, there's something. I've kind of gone back to that for a minute, but for a long time, and it's still probably, if you really, put a gun to my head and told me to choose my most likely,
well, I'm gonna do that.
I mean, that's where I was, and I guess if I had to, that's probably where I still am. Is that interplanetary always seemed like the most straightforward and kind of logical explanation to explain the vast majority of the things that we know about it. But then does it easily explain everything? There's some things that very kind of hard to explain even with that, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, this is kind of where I'm at now too, because I feel like, Jacques Vallée has raised this theory that it's called a phenomenon. which is interdimensional and put masquerades as ETs and is putting on different masks. That perhaps it's fairies, and now Bigfoot, and now ghosts, now near-death experiences. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. Where's your evidence for that? Why would you even say that? And the strongest argument for that is that some of these cases have what we call high strangeness, or maybe even symbolic elements. And I don't think that that is a strong enough piece of evidence to say that this is interdimensional and is basically being projected from our own minds or connected to us in that way, our consciousness. Because if that were true, people think about sex all the time. We'd have naked people flying around, pink elephants. I mean, it would be a far more variated phenomena, and it's not. These are flying saucers, primarily. They are saucer-shaped craft, cigar-shaped, yes, egg-shaped, spheres, boomerang-shaped. There are a lot of different shapes, but it's fairly consistent. And when someone is taken on board a craft, the sequence of events is very consistent.
Yeah. And
let's face it, people have implants in their bodies that are metallic, which have been pulled out and have been tested. The evidence is very clear. And if these are not extraterrestrials in the classic sense, biological beings from other planets, where does that leave us? Who are we? Are we some other race's mental projection? With all due respect to that theory, it's very anthropocentric and puts us at the center of the universe. And that has never worked out, historically speaking.
Yeah.
I'm not going, and I will give in to this point because I think there are demonic spirits. I've looked into all of that. I think there probably are angelic spirits. I have no doubt that there are interdimensional beings and probably all manners of paranormal beings like fairies and gnomes and leprechauns and kobolds, because every culture across this planet has a long history of this. But I don't think it's the same thing, not for a second, because if you look into each of these, they all follow a very set pattern. Just like anything that manifests in this universe, if you look at it, you can analyze it and figure it out. So I don't think that Bigfoot is a manifestation of this intelligence. I think Bigfoot is Bigfoot. And I became a Bigfoot researcher because of this. And ghosts are exactly what they appear to be. And yes, these UFOs are craft. This is my assessment, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand. I get really vehement about this because this is a theory which is gaining traction. That this is some weird phenomena. And there's no mechanism that you can describe as to how something can suddenly be manifest into reality and burn you, or heal you, or put an implant inside you, or make you disappear. I mean, it makes no sense. If you could explain to me how that happens, whereas the UFO or the extraterrestrial explanation, very logical. So Occam's razor, it's the simplest, neatest explanation. So that is my assessment. I think we're dealing with ETs, most of it. But again, a lot of stuff is getting pushed under and they're trying to label it all. And I think
it's just that there's so much going on. I'm not necessarily saying it's all connected, but there is so much going on, and there's so much that we have to try and figure out, and it's like a big puzzle, and there's so many bits that may be connected, they may not be connected, there may be links, there may be parallels but not links. There's gray areas where it's like, is that related to that? And it's I think we're still in a pretty early place, I think, in terms of humanity, in terms of unraveling all of these mysteries.
Well, that's why I love the name of your show, Unravelling the Universe, because that is exactly where we're at.
There's a lot left to unravel.
I do think these are connected, no doubt about it. Because I talk to a lot of people who've had an ET experience, and then we'll start having astral projection. We'll start seeing shadow people or experiencing mediumship, or have a Bigfoot encounter, and boom, a UFO encounter. There's weird connections, no doubt. It's very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot, and some of them we're going to probably circle back to a bit later. Bigfoot, I haven't really dipped my toes in the water there much yet, other than to simply say that, like, it's possible that there's a very large, primate that is kind of very elusive and is intelligent and hence terrified of humans, or just knows to avoid them. That's basically as far as I've gone into it. I've kind of, for the moment, I've been like, there's more than enough stuff to research in all of these other areas. I don't really need to.
I resisted Bigfoot for the longest time until I finally had my own case. I'm like, oh darn! I was afraid it was real. I was really afraid that I was going to be opening up a can of worms. I'd have to look into that, and I was exactly true. It was a huge can of worms. It became upset all over again. I'm like, great, Bigfoot is real. This is annoying.
I'm going to save that one for a rainy day, like when I've exhausted everything.
Be prepared. Because,
yeah. For the moment, all I've done, I asked, before I rebranded to Unravelling the Universe, we were Have You Met? We just spoke to a variety of people. I interviewed a primatologist, and I asked him, like, what does he think about Bigfoot? I felt I had the courage to ask him because I'd seen an interview where Jane Goodall was asked her thoughts, and she didn't rule it out. And he was probably more skeptical than Jane was, but he still was kind of like, yeah, I mean, it's possible. Like that there's a big, this guy's like a mainstream scientist, like published loads of papers, primatologist, and yeah, he's not ruling it out. So anyway, it's interesting. Let's kind of rewind a little bit or fast forward. I don't really know which way we're going, but let's talk for a second about Grusch. Wow. And obviously you mentioned like a few minutes ago, recovered craft. These will go hand in hand with his revelations or his claims. So yeah, what is your take on David Grusch? Is your take on everything that's happening right now in terms of, the congressional hearings, in terms of our kind of gradual or maybe not so gradual anymore movement towards hopefully better, more transparency and hopefully kind of disclosure, that famous word. What's your take on Grusch and everything?
Yeah, well, I certainly watched the congressional hearings with Grusch, Fravor, and Graves.
Yeah,
it went a lot farther than I thought it would. I thought this was going to be another media circus. Yeah, I was actually really pleased and surprised to hear members of Congress sit down and say UFOs are real, unequivocally. That there is a cover-up and we want it to end. The Pentagon's not cooperating, and some of us have seen UFOs. I'm like, whoa, this is strong rhetoric. This is actually really encouraging. And I do think that Grusch is probably telling the truth. I haven't interviewed him. I can only make my assessment based on what he's said. Yeah. By all accounts, his resume has not been debunked in any way. No. Certainly Fravor and Graves appear to have had genuine encounters. I thought that went quite well. I'm not sure that people are aware that these three gentlemen who testified before Congress are the very tip of a very large iceberg. Yeah. It's certainly not just them who are saying these things. This has been talked about for decades. For a very long time. Bob Lazar wasn't even the first, and he's very well known. And
since you said his name, in kind of a 5-second answer, what's your take on Bob Lazar? Is he telling the truth? Is he lying? Is he acting? Is he exaggerating? There's probably another few options there, but what's your gut feeling?
Yeah, well, my gut feeling, and which is based really on looking deep into his cases, he's telling the truth. Because there are little bits of evidence that keep coming up which verify him over and over and over again. And no one has ever been able to pin him down and present anything that just sweeps his story away. He was very viciously attacked. And whenever that happens, that raises my eyebrows, because if this is a person who is not telling the truth, then why are you all so upset? It shouldn't, just dismiss it and move on. But when someone is viciously attacked like that, because I've learned this in the UFO field, when a case is drawing all kinds of fire, there's a lot of, where there's smoke, there's fire, so to speak. And having talked to a number of contactees who said, when I saw those drawings from Bob Lazar, that was exactly the kind of craft I was in. And I'm like, wow, because I've heard that a number of times from contactees who I know are telling the truth. Certainly in my assessment, they are. Yeah, I'm a believer of Lazar. And I think there's a lot of whistleblowers out there who haven't had a chance to speak and present their stories. I've certainly interviewed a handful of them myself. I do concentrate mostly on contactees, but every now and then someone comes to me, says, no one will listen to me. They're not interested in my story. Would you be interested? I'm like, are you kidding? Of course. And I got some really good, high profile people within the military industrial complex who saw stuff that is absolutely confirming what people like Grusch are saying.
Wow. Is that people that are still in their positions now, or?
No, they were all pretty much on their deathbed. Honest to God.
Wow.
I mean, one guy was in the hospital with a chronic disease, expected to die within a month, and he did.
Yeah.
Another guy they're usually quite elderly, like they just want to do their part for disclosure. And
do they give you kind of permission to use their names and everything, or is it like, how has that been working?
Yeah. One guy did, absolutely. Ray Sachs is his name. Mm-hmm. He was an electrician's mate on the USS Clamagore, which is a submarine which carried nuclear-tipped torpedoes. And in 1971, he's on that submarine, which was traveling up the east coast of the United States at night on the surface, a few miles offshore. And he was stationed as a lookout. He was a petty officer stationed as a lookout with another petty officer. Mm-hmm. The commander, Commander Boyne, I verified Ray Sachs' employment. I found out who was on that craft at that time. Commander Boyne was on the deck as the second in command. Ray Sachs, the guy I interviewed, and another officer, when a USO showed up, an unidentified submersible object, comes zooming in at about 100 knots, which is far faster than anything we have.
Yeah.
And it came in underwater from the direction of the stern of the submarine and right up next to it, maybe 100 yards. I mean, just right next to this submarine, which doesn't happen with other ocean-going vehicles. If you approach within a quarter mile of another boat, that's considered a near miss and very dangerous, especially something as big as a submarine, which certainly would not get close to without causing an incident. And this thing was huge, several feet across, and bright white, underwater, fairly close to the surface, because they could see not the craft itself, but certainly its illumination. And Ray Sachs, it was his job to be in touch with the sonar room and relay the information about any craft that might be coming to approach. And the sonar people did not see anything. It was not reflecting on sonar, which was really unusual. But they do have the ability to do this, these craft. And this darn thing tracked that submarine for 15 minutes, totally silent, during which time, according to Ray, the guy I interviewed, all the higher ranking officers came up on deck to take a little look-see at this thing, because they wanted to see it. No one could identify it. And Ray Sachs, was jibber-jabbering with the other guy, got in trouble for that. The second in command's like, you guys shut up. Do not talk about this. You are not to talk about this. And finally it darts off at, about 80 knots in the other direction. And the second in command turns to Commander Boyne and says, "Sir, how would you like me to record this in the log?" And the commander turns to him and says sternly, and this is pretty much a direct quote, "Officers who report this kind of incident in the log do not move up in rank." So it wasn't recorded in the log.
Yeah.
And Ray went down below deck and everyone crowded around him. He's like, "What'd you see? What'd you see?" They already knew. So he just spilled the beans. It was the buzz of the Clamagore for the whole time he was on there. And it wasn't the only incident. I mean, one time the whole submarine went offline, bam, which can't happen because they've got diesel engines and batteries and all kinds of fail safes. And they could not bring it online. I honestly think this was a message from the ETs saying, stop it, stop messing around with nuclear weapons. So yeah, he's one whistleblower I interviewed who said, yeah, you can use my name. Like, are you sure you're not going to get in trouble? Did you sign an NDA? He's like, no, they never asked me to sign anything. I go, oh, well, okay. So
it's funny how that happens, doesn't it? Like, there's often these cases where people keep quiet. They never had to sign an NDA. It's just, I guess, the pressure of the taboo and the stigma and the way it's, the way, I don't know the right word to use, but yeah, I mean, I probably used the right words already. The taboo and the stigma, that probably is pretty much it, right? That's why people keep quiet, and their career, I suppose, while they're working. But in general, it comes down to the taboo and the stigma.
Yeah, well, one guy I did interview did sign an NDA. Mel Hansen, he was part of the very famous Malmstrom incident in March of 1967.
Yeah, and
he contacted me. He was elderly and wanted to do his part for disclosure. He says, Preston, I contacted a number of researchers and they didn't want to hear my story. I'm like, really? What's your story? And he described how he was at Malmstrom.
So who was he there? Was he with Bob? Was he one of the people outside, or?
Yeah, he was not associated with Robert Salas, who himself, Robert Salas, didn't actually see anything.
No,
but he was there and watched the
control room,
the ICBMs go offline, boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
But he did interview guards and stuff, and a number of other witnesses. And here's this guy who turns out he was not directly military, but was kind of a subcontractor. He would go from base to base. He was a specialist on missile sites where he would basically maintain them.
Yeah.
He was there that night at one of the sites, which, by the way, are widely separated. I had a little bit of a misconception about what an air base is, but these are very widely separated, and it's an enormous amount of land that the space covers.
Yeah, so each missile is,
they're all independent of each other. So just because they're not connected, if one trips, it doesn't mean the other is going to.
Yeah, they're not Christmas lights.
But of course, good analogy. But they all did go offline, and he was there as part of the maintenance team. He was the head of the team. He was there on topside with the security guy, who, of course, you have to have when you're working on one of these silos. And his whole team was underground, just checking all the systems. Mm-hmm. And he says it was a weird night because everything was so quiet. It was just this perfectly still, peaceful night. And suddenly he sees the stars are becoming occluded. You can't see the stars. It was a very dark night. And he's looking up, and there's this huge dark shape directly over the missile. And I'm like, well, how big? How high up? He says, honestly, Preston, I can't tell you for sure, because I don't know how big this thing was or how high up it was, but it was low and it was large. Which, I'm glad he said that, because when people say, oh, I know exactly it was this size, I'm like, well, how can you know?
Yeah.
Because a good witness will say, it's very hard to estimate its height, its altitude, and its size. And he said it was absolutely dead quiet. It did not make a single noise. And he couldn't really even see its exact shape because it was just so dark. But as soon as it came over that, he, of course, calls Base Central. He's like, something's going on here. You better bring someone out. And they said, we're on our way. It's going to take us 45 minutes, because that's how far away this is from the Base Central. They said, stay in the Jeep. Do not do anything. He hung up. The guard was losing his mind. He's like really freaking out. But Mel jumps out of the Jeep because he wants to see it. So he's already disobeying orders. And he's looking up at it when, boom, the missile goes offline and immediately goes back online, because, of course, it does have a fail-safe. It has a generator, which kicked in and put the whole site back online, but only for a minute, moments. That went offline. And it had a second fail-safe. it went back online again with battery power, and that went offline again.
Yeah.
So this is clearly intentional. This was a big deal. This should not be able to happen. And after it went offline for, I guess, the third time, this thing moves off. And long story short, they came, picked him up, said, leave everything. You're coming with us. And took him and his whole team back to base and questioned them all night and had them sign NDAs and basically threatened them. Said, you are not to say a word about this. And he never did. He said, you can't even talk with your coworkers about this. Not one word, or there will be consequences. And he says, honestly, Preston, me and my best friend who were on the team did talk, but only out in the wilderness when we were camping. And after they all passed away over the years and years, because this was 67, they were all gone. And he was watching TV with his daughter, and the Malmstrom incident came on. I think it was Unsolved Mysteries. And he's like, well, I guess I can talk now. And that's how he's like, if you'd like to hear the story, I'm willing to tell you everything. I want to do my part for disclosure. Wow. Are you kidding? I know this incident. Tell me everything.
Yeah.
So that was a real honest to God treat and an honor to be able to talk to this gentleman. Help him tell his story. So,
absolutely.
So I do believe Grusch. I do believe Lazar, and that congressional hearing was a landmark event, because I don't think it's ever been discussed in that way in terms of there being crashed UFOs, because there's been previous congressional hearings, which were largely about sightings. But I'm on the fence about this, Ben, for a couple of reasons, because this isn't disclosure. This is talk of from witnesses who have no hard physical evidence, really. I mean, there's photographs. I guess that is hard physical evidence, but Grusch in particular, it's his word. That's it. He says he did turn in stuff to the superiors, which we aren't seeing.
Yeah.
But the Pentagon immediately pushed back. Sean Kirkpatrick, the head of the AARO, I've got a few things to say about that, immediately pushed back and says, no, he never told us. We have no information on this. This is not true.
Yeah.
So this is not disclosure. It's not. This is steps towards it that are significant and definitely a landmark event. But
how do you put it into context, like moving forward, when we are saying, in terms of disclosure, I think we'd probably agree that this is the biggest moment in regards to UFOs since you've been looking into it, I would guess, in a political sense. But is it actually going to lead somewhere? I've heard a few people say, the cat's out the bag now, it's not going back in this time, or you can't put the toothpaste back in the bottle, and all these various quotes are going around, and this time it's happening. We're going to have some kind of confirmation by the end of this year of, a non-human intelligence interfering with us or our planet. And, all of these things people are saying, and people seem pretty confident about it. But what do you think? Somebody that's really got a lot of experience, a lot of history in this field, do you think this is just another false awakening? Is this, because we've heard this so many times, we're making progress now, but this does feel different. What do you think? Is this different? Is this the one?
I am a little skeptical. I don't think this is going to lead to any huge revelations. I expect what we're going to see next are more people testifying. We'll probably get some more blurry photographs coming out. I expect that will happen. I expect they may even show us a little piece of metal. Say, we retrieved this, we don't know what it is, which infuriates me, because I know they have craft. I mean, anyone who's researched this knows that our military, the secret government might be a better way of putting it, or the highest levels of the military industrial complex does have the evidence. And they're still lying about it. They have not admitted to it. This is just my assessment, my feeling that this feels almost sanctioned in a way. Like Grusch is like, okay, we're going to let you do this so we can control the narrative, because they are pushing this ET threat narrative, and I can see it very loud and clear, and it's not true. That concerns me. So I feel like part of me is like, this is sanctioned, they're controlling it, they're doing it the way they want it, they're rolling it out at their pace, and it's not going to go much farther. It's going to be very just one brick wall after another after another. And we're not going to get disclosure anytime soon.
What about in 5 years or something? Do you think, like, is this the beginning? You don't think we're even really like in the ballpark yet?
I don't know. I think at some point disclosure will happen, because truth is truth. You can hide it. You can distort it. You can do all kinds of things to it, but you can't destroy it. Truth is truth. If it happened, it's going to come out. But I don't think our governments are going to do it willingly. On the other hand, I think these steps we're seeing now are probably unwilling, involuntary, and done only because they've reached a point now where the entire public knows this is a real phenomena. Anyone with an ounce of sense can look at the evidence themselves in the public arena and see that there's validity to this phenomena. So if our governments, our secret governments, the Pentagon, NASA, all these guys don't take steps towards disclosure, they're going to be a laughing stock. They're going to look ridiculous. They will not be credible. They've reached that point. It's just not credible to deny this phenomenon. So I feel like they have to disclose, or they become irrelevant. So it wouldn't surprise me if at some point we do see a craft. At some point, I think that will happen. I am not sure it's going to be the US that does it or another country. But that's one of the things I kind of like about this, is we have all these, there's France, there's England, there's Canada, there's Mexico, Brazil, Chile.
Don't rely on the UK for anything about this.
There's disclosure is happening on multiple fronts.
And
it's kind of like, people are racing towards the finish line, and who's going to get there first?
When do you think we'll see a craft? Just a wild guess of like a year, or even like to round it to the closest 5 years or 10 years. Like, when do you think that is realistically possible? Like, when do you think we might get to that level?
Oh gosh, I'm so skeptical, because when I got involved in this field, people were saying disclosure is going to happen this year.
There's lots of
it never did, and then it would say it again, and I've heard this 20 times. It is a little bit different now, and it wouldn't surprise me if we get some real significant steps towards this. But I just don't trust our governments. We still have yet to have a sitting head of state say UFOs are real. They've gotten out of office. Governors and mayors and even presidents have said, I did see a UFO. The president of Brazil, president of Mexico, presidents of several countries around the world.
Even Obama's basically said that they're real, right? At this point, he said there are things in the sky flying around and we don't know what they are. I think that's pretty much what he said.
Trump came very close, but even he didn't fully say it. Certainly, we haven't had a word out of Biden in terms of like, this is absolutely real. So I am skeptical. I really am.
You don't think in the next decade, do you? You don't think we're going to have
I think a decade is a safe bet.
Yeah.
But I think what is much more likely would be ETs coming down in large numbers and saying, game over. Since you're not going to disclose, we will.
That brings me to an interesting thought, because I've seen this maybe in a couple of places, like people, again, mostly just rumors and speculation, or as far as I know, all rumors and speculation. I have no way of verifying this at all. But I've seen quite a number of people mentioning the idea that is the non-human intelligence in some capacity kind of pushing us in this direction, or forcing us to release this information, or is there something from that angle? What do you think of that?
Well, I'm going to go back to 1954, Edwards Air Force Base, President Eisenhower, many leaders within business and military and religion, and all were there at Edwards Air Force Base.
Because let me just interrupt you just to say I don't really know a lot about that case. I know what you're referring to, but I guess for a while it was always too much, and I just didn't, I was like, that's not the one there's so many cases. I was like, that's not the one I'm going to focus on right now because it's too wild. I don't think I can, believe it. But yeah, if you tell me a little bit about it, then tell me a little bit more about that case, and if you think it's compelling, if you think there's something
this
to
was
it.
February 1954, and Eisenhower was at Edwards Air Force Base with a lot of other very high-level people within society when they allegedly had a UFO, an ET craft, land and had a face-to-face meeting. And immediately after this happened, there were some people who were there who were whistleblowing this, and researchers converged on this case, and it's still a hot potato topic. There's still more evidence coming out about this exact incident, and I think it's probably real. I've certainly looked into it, because if you know anything about Edwards Air Force Base, it's a UFO magnet. Yeah. Way back in 1945, they had a sighting which changed the way the military handled this topic, because everyone on the base saw UFOs flying over it. J.Allen Hynek was called over, and he investigated it. 47, or around there, was 45, old thereabouts. But at any rate, this incident in 54, I believe, did happen, because the reporting on it is very solid, and most researchers who've looked into this have come away convinced, and I'm going to count myself among them. And the reason I bring this up is because the ETs reportedly warned us against using nuclear power and materials and weapons, and wanted us to stop this program because it was basically would possibly destroy us, and we were messing around with forces we were not in control of and didn't understand the consequences of. And we said, no, we're not doing that. We want your technology. And they said, no, we're not giving you technology. You are lagging behind in your spiritual growth. What you need to do is disclose our presence. And they said, we're not doing that. That would upset religion and business and politics. And so there was an impasse, basically. And at that point, 1954, and you can see this in the cases, the first 10 cases, is when this is when we started having major waves of UFO activity. This is when people started to be taken on board. This is when they started hovering over schoolyards like Westall High School and Crestview Elementary School and Broadhaven and Hillsdale College.
I want to come back to schoolyards as well.
I wrote a whole book on that. Over drive-in movie theaters, they started doing what UFO researchers call displays. So essentially, they are doing the ETs, a grassroots campaign, going to the people directly and announcing their presence. And I think this is preparation for eventual open official contact. So yeah, I think the ETs are absolutely aware of what's going on. I don't think that they're having any deals with the government. I don't see any good reporting on that.
Or agreements, in the word of Grusch. You don't think there's any potential agreements there? Because if you remember from the hearings, Grusch said, I would also like, I think he said, I would also like more information on that. Or maybe it wasn't in the hearings. That was it, the agreements? Was that in the interview with Ross, or was he asked about that in the hearing as well?
I would have to go over that. I don't remember him specifically talking about agreements, but I haven't.
I think it was with Ross then. That Ross asked him about that, didn't he? And he said, well, I would also like more information about that.
Yeah. Ross Coldheart. Yeah. I saw that interview as well.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, because Grusch was saying, well, I can't talk about this or that. And we know if he had, people have done whistleblowing and lost their lives over this. There's some well-confirmed cases of people who've been basically shut up or threatened and says, I cannot talk. And other people have been told, well, yes, you can talk about this to this degree. So they have a little sort of dance they have to do. And I really feel for these people who've, been threatened. Grusch says he's suffered reprisals that were fairly significant.
Yeah.
And I know he's not the only one. So I think that at some point disclosure will have to occur, because someone's going to be like, you know what? I don't care. I've got no family. It's just me. I've got the evidence. I've kept it hidden. I'm going to tell. I think that there's a real possibility of that. And that's why they're like, okay, we need to control this. And this is why they're rolling it out. I don't know. There's also, of course, the false flag possible event, which there's a lot of buzz about in the UFO community, that there's going to be a fake ET invasion. I'm very concerned about that. I think that we're seeing evidence of that. There was a recent case in Peru, I think it was, where ETs are peeling people's faces off in some village and blah, 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 blah. I don't want to speak too much on that case because I haven't researched it. I haven't talked to a researcher. I haven't seen any good reporting on it. But I'm skeptical because my research does not show or support an ET invasion at all. It's quite the opposite. So I think we're going to see some very interesting events coming up, to say the least. That's putting it real lightly. I don't know that we'll have disclosure from the US or England or any of the major, I'll put that in quotes, quote, superpowers, because that's all, neither here nor there. Everyone has the ability to disclose, no matter what type of country they are. But we'll
do you think there are agreements? I mean, of course there are agreements between, countries of different governments of different countries. Of course there are agreements there, but do you think there is specific agreements, like in terms of keeping this quiet? Like, do you think, how does that work? Because I get this question a lot, like, why doesn't some other country, why doesn't China, Russia, or some small country disclose this to the world and beat the US and everybody to the chase and leave them with egg on their face? Why not? And why doesn't a small country do it to try and get all the eyes on them? I don't know. I suspect that there's probably some kind of probably an agreement. I would say it's probably, again, this is not from a place of super research. This is just how I think power systems work. I imagine the US are probably paying people in terms of, in exchange, we're going to come and pick up craft that crash in your country. You're going to tell us about them. If you have, sightings or encounters, you're going to report them to us. And we don't have to tell you anything we don't want to tell you. But we'll give you money. That's, I guess, one of my gut feelings. But what's your feeling on, how that works? How we've managed to have not one country step out and say, oh yeah, there's UFOs are real and they represent a non-human intelligence and they are here. What do you think?
I agree with you, and I think it's been a successful venture because it's not involving presidents or heads of states or senators, representatives, or the people we think are running the country.
Because I was going to ask you something else about that actually as well, is that, who, when we say the government knows, the government's keeping a secret, who actually do you think knows? Who actually is able to keep this secret? Because I think it's probably, and I'm sure you'll agree, but I think it's a very tiny percentage of people in government that are actually aware of anything beyond, there's stuff in the sky that we don't understand.
I think there is a secret government, so to speak, where perhaps some members of the sitting governments being, members of this cabal, the one percenters, the power elite, you can call them what you want, but is tracking it down from, I focus most of my research on contactees, but I try to follow all aspects of this. There's a million rabbit holes and this is all connected. But I do think that there's a quasi-government aspect to this, which is really the military-industrial complex. That's who's controlling it. It's the highest levels of the Pentagon, of the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, at the very highest levels of perhaps the insurance industry, the banking industry, the oil industry. These people who I think are not even government, who are behind the cover-up, the super rich, the one percenters are, they're controlling, Illuminati, people use that term. There's I mean, if you look into it, it's quite alarming. I think that they are the ones who are behind the cover up, and that they are cooperating with different countries, and that people who are presidents are not even in the loop most often. Some have been, I think, especially way back in the 1940s with Truman and so forth. I think he probably knew something, because that's when the NSA formed, and that's when, quote, MJ-12 was put together, which I think is real, despite the documents that surround this, which are controversial and very cleverly put out misinformation with true elements and false elements. They're very good at muddying the waters and making what's real look not real by putting out fake real stuff. I mean, like the alien autopsy is a good example. We know this happened, but that was fake. I mean, there's almost no doubt that was fake. And yet we know for sure that everything in that was essentially real. It did happen. So that is how clever these guys are with disinformation. Yeah, I do think they're cooperating. And I think it's the highest levels of the military who are not elected officials. They go in there with an unlimited budget. You look into the black budget, it's alarming. I talked to Michael Schratt. He's there's a handful of researchers I'm like, okay, here's a good guy. This is someone who I think is doing good research, because there's some I'm like, ooh, I'm not touching you with a 10-foot pole. You are a liar. Where are you getting your information? This is not true. But yeah, I trust, and he laid it out in black and white. He did his homework. And there's absolutely a huge black budget going towards all of this. All our tax dollars. I mean, the vast majority of the money that we give to taxes is going towards covering up this subject and developing it in the ways, they know a lot. They know far, far more than we here in the general public have any idea. They have the craft. They have the saucers. They know who the ETs are. They know everything that's going on. They know who the contactees are. They're absolutely surveilling them, and researchers probably watching this show, because they have artificial intelligence that monitors everything. There's no doubt about this. Researchers have looked into it. This is very tightly controlled, and you can see that with this rollout of these whistleblowers. So we'll see how this all pans out.
And you were saying about that false flag. Do you think that is something that would actually, would they actually do that? Do you think? So what's that? That's basically pretending that we're being invaded in order to. Am I right? Is that what it is? It's pretending we're being invaded in order to soak up extra money and keep us under control and everything like that. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and I'm not happy about it. And what I would ask people is to do your homework on this, and you can see that the reverse engineering of ET craft has happened, certainly to a pretty good extent. Maybe not, they can't completely understand everything that's going on. From what I understand, there are craft in military possession that they can't even get inside. They can't even open them.
Yeah, that sounds easier to believe a lot than they would have completely, reverse engineered something successfully, actually.
Yeah, but the TR-3B has been pointed to, this triangular craft, as being military. And if you look in the history of governments across the world for the past hundreds of years, they're not treating the people well. And you can see this outside of the UFO field completely. I mean, our own US government has irradiated soldiers, radiated them without telling them, just here, we're going to put you here and explode an atomic bomb next to you. Good luck. And they all got cancer. And they gave people hallucinogenics without telling them, fed people venereal disease, basically sterilized segments of the disenfranchised population. Our governments are not treating us with, morals and ethics outside of the UFO field. And we see this certainly within the UFO field, lies from day one. So I don't trust them at all. I don't think they have our best interests in mind. And when we have companies, military companies, weapons companies who are private, selling weapons to both sides and inciting wars.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Do they have our best? Clearly, no, they don't.
And then on top of that, you turn on the TV, and who's on the mainstream news giving their opinion on this war that's about to kick off? Oh, it's somebody high up in a weapons company, and he's saying that we probably should go to war because the other country, I was going to say the other team, are very naughty and very bad, and we need to destroy them. Yep. It's wild, isn't it, when you think about it? That blows my mind when I turn on the news, and I'm like, who are we listening to commentating on this potential? Like, I'm thinking back to when Russia and Ukraine was first, you were starting to see a few sparks and a bit of smoke, and I'm thinking, who is this? Because we should be listening to somebody that's maybe a former veteran that now protests against unnecessary war, but no, we've got this guy who works for. Oh, okay, I see, right. Yeah. So he has no vested interests in this at all. Nothing like that.
It's upsetting. It's really upsetting.
It's infuriating.
People need to wake up and realize that we are being essentially enslaved. I mean, it's absolutely true. If all the wealth is with 1% of the population, we are just living check to check. And our food and water is being poisoned, and people are being fed lies. Did you know more people die of prescription drug overdoses than illegal drugs, which are also sanctioned? The drug war is a farce.
Yeah.
It is being, I learned this from firsthand witnesses who told me, oh no, our governments are the ones who are bringing in all these drugs that are killing people, illegal and legal. So this is what we're dealing with. Governments who do not have our best interests in mind. So yes, I do think there's going to be a false flag. I can't prove it. This is not my area of expertise. This is just my assessment based on what I've, been able to observe, and occasionally get little bits of firsthand information from my own witnesses.
Yeah.
But certainly the ETs have told a few contactees, oh yeah, you do not trust your governments. They are absolutely have zero morals. We will not deal with them. They are bad.
Yeah.
The people who are being contacted are good people. I started looking into like that. I'm like, why are some people being contacted and others not? Because, it's evenly divided between men and women. It's certainly all ancestries and blood types and all educational levels. And I mean, I could find almost no pattern until I really dug deep. And I found out, well, wait, almost everyone who is having direct contact has a very strong psychic awareness. These are people who are having a wide variety of paranormal, what we would call quote, paranormal events.
Yeah.
And they're also really nice, good people. And I am going to underline that because I started looking at like who is having contact. It is nurses, it's doctors, it's social workers, it's environmentalists, it's musicians, inventors, police officers, people who are, really working hard to help humanity. And that's a very strong pattern. So I think that really, again, speaks towards the benevolence of contact, because they are doing what they can to help us without coming down and violating the laws of karma, which actually comes up, that word, ETs have used it, that word over and over again. They said, we cannot solve your problems. You made your bed, you have to fix it. These are, as any parent knows this, you can't do everything for your kid. If you tie their shoes until they're an adult, they're going to walk out the door and not know how to tie their shoes. So we have to solve our own problems. This is a very strong message from the ETs. Wake up. Wait. So this is why, can you imagine, Ben, if we all had telepathy, how quickly corruption and greed and the lies would just fall by the wayside if we could just read each other?
I think even in a way, maybe the research suggests that we all do have that innate ability, but it's just, that we're not able to access it. Like I personally have no way of using that I might have in me. So if we were all able to access and use that function to find it, you're right, everything would change overnight.
Which is why our governments are working so hard to stop that. Fluoridating water, which we now know calcifies your pineal gland, which is basically the organ in your brain that allows clear psychic ability. They know that fluoridated water is not good for you. And yet, it's outlawed in a number of countries, not here in the US. Our food sources are polluted to a degree that's alarming.
Yeah.
I think it's intentional.
It's wild.
So, no more. Stop it. These guys are making some very poor decisions because, as nice it is to have a lot of money and have control over everybody, in the long run, it's not good karma. You're going to die at some point, and you're going to have a huge wake-up call when you realize you've made very poor decisions. This is my message to them, because I know they're listening. Stop it! It's not too late to go to the right side and do the right thing. It's not hard to tell the truth. It's easier than lying. It's a much better decision for everyone involved to just do the right thing.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of my interview with Preston Dennett. Thank you to Preston for talking with me, and thank you to our patrons for helping to make it possible. Part 2 will be published next Friday. We discuss schoolyard UFO cases, abduction cases, and much more. Please subscribe to continue unraveling the universe with us. Thank you.